This is Performance Time, the show about human beings and performance engineering. I'm Stephen Townsend. Okay, today on the show, I'm excited to speak to Nicole van der Hoeven, who is a performance engineer based out of the Netherlands. And from my opinion, she's one of the best spoken and articulate performance engineers in the industry. And she does a really good job of making really complex ideas understandable to all of us. So welcome, Nicole, and it's fantastic to talk to you.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the compliment, I guess. I try to be understandable. I guess that's my thing.
So I guess the first thing everyone would like to know is, how did you get into this performance engineering world?
I got into performance a little bit out of, it was just an accident, really, and luck. I was very lucky that I found there was a job ad for something called performance testing. I knew that I wanted to get into testing at that point, but I have an economics degree. I had never done anything, I guess, sort of academically or professionally with technology at all. But I have always been interested in it. And then I found this ad that was written in a really quirky way. Like the ad was saying that they were looking for people who are willing to learn rather than people who already knew a lot. And I thought, sign me up. And that turned out to be an interview with Stijn Schepers, who I think we have in common as a mentor.
My interview experience with Stijn was also very quirky as well.
Was one of the interview questions, do you drink beer?
It might have been actually, yes, but the main event of the interview was that because he'd found out I'd gone to drama school to train as an actor, so for the first part of my interview was him showing me his DVD collection of films and asking me to rate them.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, for my interview, there were lots of questions, and some of them were technical or like not really technical, but things about the industry, recent trends, like what is Android? And when I got to that question, what is Android? I said something like, well, it's a mobile operating system, but they're also cybernetic robots that may or may not dream of electric sheep, which is a reference to a sci-fi book by Philip K. Dick. And that's the one that Blade Runner was made out of, if you're familiar with the movie. And for some reason, Stijn was looking for someone who had a little bit more of the soft skills, someone who was interesting to work with. And I think I got the job on that line.
After that, you must have found something about the work engaging. Otherwise, you would have changed fields, right? So, what do you think it is about the work which kept you going?
My favorite part about testing, and in particular performance testing, is that it's like a bridge between developers and the business or users. And in a way, we're translators because those are two groups that often don't really think about each other's needs, or at least it's not their priority. And I think testers exist to bring the two worlds together. So I love that duality of being able to play in both sandboxes because I'm very much drawn to people and talking to people and figuring out how something works together. But I'm also drawn to building things and the intellectual rigor of creating an application and having it be logically consistent for other people to use.
What do you think, in the realm specifically of performance engineering, your style is? What is your style as a performance engineer?
I think my style is to educate the team to do performance without me. I guess that's why I'm a developer advocate because I have done performance testing as a consultant before. I mean, most of my career has been that. And the problem with it is problem with it for me is it can be pretty repetitive. There are a lot of course, you have to learn new technologies and new frameworks, and there's new people. There are always new challenges, but at its core, the process is the same. And I got to a certain point where I was like, I could do it for you, or how about I just sit with your team? Because there is no reason that you need to be hiring a person just to do performance testing. Performance should be everybody's concern. And a developer could be a performance tester, an automation tester could be a performance tester. Like, there doesn't have to be, I think people think sometimes that you have to go to school and have very specific experience, but I want to open it up. Like, there's nothing mysterious about it. So I think my style is to educate people to do it themselves, which kind of goes better with what I want anyway, because I love the challenge of something new.
That is quite interesting to me. I do find that I would love to enable more teams to do more for themselves as well, and I'm continually trying to do that. There are limits to what you can hand over to someone who's not a specialist in performance,
Yeah.
though. So what do you think the way to work around it is? Do you still have specialists and then you hand over the simpler or maybe more repetitive work to delivery teams? What's the balance?
Yeah, I think that there's always going to be room for a performance specialist, but I think that I personally like it better when my role shifts more towards a like a mentoring capability where I'm helping people improve while still doing the work myself, because I actually like being hands-on. But I think that if you're not teaching, the next generation, or even the same generation, but just people in other teams that are interested in it, then I feel like you're just making things more difficult for yourself in the long run, because you're going to be stuck doing that for a while.
Yeah.
Do you agree? It's okay to disagree with me.
I I find myself in a situation where I'm torn between what's best for the organization and what's best for the particular project or program of work we're on right now. I'm thinking about outcomes. So if I can enable teams to be more self-sufficient, that's the best thing for us in the long run. And it's good, better for me because I can focus on higher quality, more valuable work, more interesting work. But in the context of a program of work, we would probably get a better outcome if I just did the work myself with my team. So it's a tricky thing, especially when the money might be coming from the program. So how do you justify actually we need to put the organization first?
Yeah, I think that was a problem for me too. And as a consultant, sometimes my engagements were as short as I actually had an engagement that was 1 day. Can you imagine? But they were still maybe a month or so on average. And when you have a short amount of time like that, you can't really think of how am I going to change the organization. You have to focus on the project, which it really frustrated me because I wanted to deliver value that would last, not just do the job for this time and when you need it done again, well, call me again. Which, I guess I should have been happy that that was continued work for me, but I wanted to do something that would change the foundation of how they do testing. So I think that some forms of performance testing will still be carried out by performance testers just because of the specialization that's required. But there's so many other forms of performance that can be done, during development or
Mm.
during deployment. What about setting up a CI/CD framework with performance in it? There are a lot of things that can be automated that don't need a specialist to run them. They can just run on their own automatically after code's checked in. That was the kind of thing that I wanted to set up, but the reality was that when I would be called into a project, it was just fix this thing, and then when it's done, see you later.
Yeah. So you want to do the strategic, but you're being pulled into the tactical firefighting.
Yeah, and that's kind of why now I've moved a little bit over to developer advocacy for performance testing because I've found a lot of success in trying to teach performance testers or would-be performance testers how to do these things. And then they can then, be the performance champion for their project teams or organizations.
I really admire your outlook. I find that your perspective is very refreshing and positive, and it's something. I guess it's something I kind of needed to hear right now. That it's not all impossibly difficult to make this stuff happen, and we just got to keep putting our best foot forward.
Yeah, I think sometimes we need a bit of a change, whether that's just a new project or a new outlook or a new job.
So obviously, you're really good at a lot of things in the world of performance. My question is, everyone, you're good at a lot of things clearly, but everyone's got some things which they just find really difficult or challenging, or they dread doing. For me, for example, I really struggle having ad hoc conversations with people of high authority in the organization, so high executives of a high level. I can prepare a talk and a presentation and it will go pretty smooth. But when the random sideswipe questions happen out of nowhere, I just fall apart. I melt into a puddle, right? It's just something I need to work on, right? So how about you? What's your kryptonite? What's the stuff that you find really hard on the job?
I like shiny things. That sounds funny, but I legitimately have a weakness for new technologies, new tools in particular. I naturally want to try everything to the point that I really can't understand how other people can stick to using just one tool for years and years. So that sounds like a weird weakness, but I actually think that a lot of the times using new tools can be detrimental to a company, especially if they've invested significant resources into a tool or a way of working that already just works. So I constantly have to remind myself like, no, they maybe they haven't asked for a new tool, they're okay with this one, maybe just go with it for now. I do have a tendency to go into a project and think, let's just change everything. How about we use this tool now for CI/CD, and then let's put this on Tableau for results. I just have all these ideas that I maybe need to scale down and just get things going to start with.
Yeah, I guess you got to find that balance of doing the thing which is familiar to other people in the organization, and then getting that
Yeah.
time is so important. I think to whatever that time is, maybe a day a week, you get to do stuff which is your growth, and you get to enjoy all the shiny new tools and toys. Do you have a war story, a situation like a really nasty performance issue that you found in the past, and a story you could tell us about that?
Sure. I think you've already heard this one, Stephen, the abridged version of it when we did that panel at Testing Talks Online. But I was in a project where the purpose of it was to tune the system to get, the end result was to send out these letters to customers. And we worked on it for a very long time. I kind of joined it halfway into the project, but it was still really successful. We found a lot of performance issues and addressed them and got it to a ridiculous amount of letters that could be generated per second. And then we presented our findings to the stakeholders, including customer support. And they said, why weren't we told about this? Because we can't handle that amount of load. These letters, or at least some of them, have contents that might require that might push people to go and call us, and we just don't have the people for that. So can you slow that down and go backwards? And we had to actually create a rate limiting system to slow it down. So we had spent so much of our time trying to speed it up, but then we had to rate limit it in the end. And it sticks out in my mind because it is a failure on our part, on the testing part, because we didn't consider the human factors of performance that can often be even more important than the technical factors. In the Netherlands, we have this app for I guess tracking the spread of COVID-19, as many countries have as well. But it came under fire because there were a lot of performance issues, especially when it came to setting appointments for your COVID test. I guess they do it now for vaccinations. But anyway, they fixed it to the point that it was that people were able to book these appointments, but the part in the process that wasn't taken into consideration was the traffic, the not the technical traffic, like not HTTP traffic to a server, but the actual traffic with cars that occurred around these testing centers. Because apparently it was so awful that a lot of cars couldn't even get to the center in time for their appointment. So I just thought that that was an interesting part of the entire process that a performance tester probably did not think about. And I mean, why would you? We often just try to tune the computer parts, but the human parts are just as important, sometimes even more so.
I think that takes the concept of an end-to-end performance test to the next level. So you go all the way from the software to the point the car gets to the station.
Yeah, well, because when you think about it, what's the point in being able to handle all these appointments if people can't make it to those appointments anyway? And you're just wasting your time.
All right. So one of the things that you have been talking about recently, and it sounds like it's an interest of yours, is the concept of chaos engineering and how that affects performance testing. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of how the chaos engineering impacts us as performance engineers?
Sure, yes. I've been getting into chaos engineering just because I think that it is intrinsically linked to performance testing because at its heart, they want to do the same thing. They want to improve software reliability and performance. And the biggest challenge in it is that they have a little bit of a different approach. In testing, we have an idea of what an application should be able to do, and then we check whether it actually does it. But chaos engineering just kind of takes for granted that at some point the application is not going to behave the way we expect. There are going to be failures. So what happens when it does? So I am so interested in it because it's a completely different way of thinking. It's an acceptance of the fact that no matter how much we plan and test, there are things that will happen in real life that we never expected. So we might as well try to make our applications robust enough to handle the unexpected as well. And I've also been experimenting with incorporating chaos experiments into my load tests. So imagine a script where in addition to the typical load test that you would have with a certain scenario, let's say it runs for an hour, in addition to that, you have a single user, a chaos user, that then says, okay, well, how about after I've gotten that as a baseline and I know how my server typically behaves, how about 30 minutes into the test, I just kill a Kubernetes pod or I kill one of the instances that's involved in this system. How does the application respond? Does the response time increase? Are there just errors that can never be recovered? Is there a data loss? There's just so many factors that can expose just from a single user that runs along with a test. And if it's a tool that lets you script it in, then you can make it smarter. You're not just running it simultaneously throughout the entire test. You can maybe run it at a spike, or there's so many things you can do with it. And it's just really exciting to think of where this could go in a few years.
Do you design these chaos tests yourself, or do other people work with you to come up with ideas for things to try?
I definitely ask other people for advice because I'm a tester. I'm not into DevOps. I've never worked in as a site reliability engineer, so there are definitely things that I would not have considered. But I do script it myself, and I mean I don't want to plug here, but I did use K6 because of this. So K6 is a load testing tool where you script in JavaScript. And so the chaos experiments are also just scripted in JavaScript. So it's really no different. It's a matter of importing a package, and I just script it the way that I would any other user.
Something a little bit different that you mentioned when we were bouncing emails back and forward is the importance of note taking for any software engineer. Now, this sounds really interesting to me, and I think I'm also really into this, but I just want to hear your take or what you meant by that.
So I think that a lot of people just think note taking is a thing that you do in college or in school, but I think it has applications for outside academia. And I really don't understand how people survive without it because I think it's very logical to me that there's a finite amount of information that we can store in our brains. That's just a fact. We can take that as a given. And yet, if we're working in technology, whether you're a tester or a developer or an SRE, you have to be able to understand new concepts all the time, frameworks and languages and just different ways to work. There is no possible way that we're going to remember all of that. So we need to come up with some sort of system that we can offload things into. Otherwise, you're learning things, and I am 100% sure that in 10 years, you'll not even remember that you were doing this unless you're doing exactly the same thing, which is unlikely in tech, right? And so I think that note-taking and building a sort of personal knowledge management system as a second brain to offload this information in becomes so much more important. At its core, I think testing is a knowledge work. We're not being paid for, physical prowess. We're being paid for what we know and how well we do testing. And those are things that we can take notes on and learn from and improve as time goes by.
I actually have a grad that I'm mentoring right now, and she carries a notepad wherever she goes and takes notes on everything, which is awesome. She likes the physical paper. I use Confluence, and I have my own knowledge bases that I build up over many, many years because like you, I forget things all the time and I want to refer back to what I learned. What technologies or tools have you found useful?
So I do love writing on paper, but I mainly reserve that for like brainstorming sort of sessions. I've found I go entirely digital for my notes just because a few things. One, you can version control it. And so you can also see how your thinking evolves over time, which I've found really useful, especially if I'm trying to make a content piece on something from the point of view of a beginner. Then I can see like what were the questions that I had when I was learning this at the beginning. So the second thing is that you can back it up. So you never have to lug around physical notebooks. And if you take notes the way that I do, I would be lugging around several notebooks, and it would then be hard to find. So that's the third thing, that you can search it easily. And you can search it from any device. So what I personally do, and I don't think there's a best tool for the job, but I use something called Obsidian. Have you heard of it?
No, I've never heard of it before. What is Obsidian?
Yeah, so it's obsidian.md. I don't work for them, don't get anything from them, and it's entirely free. They do have a paid version if you want them to store your data in that, but it stores your notes as markdown files locally. So it's just plain text files. And I like that because I've used other note-taking systems in the past, like Notion or Roam Research, where they keep your files and it's not in, I think Notion uses a proprietary markdown format, but it's not saved locally. So you don't really have that access to it at all times. So you can't switch to another provider or another tool whenever you want. But Obsidian is really awesome because it gives you your files, and it also has this thing called backlinks, where you just create a link from one note to another. But then if you go to that second note, you'll also see the first note as a reference to it. And that's whether you create a link specifically or whether you just type that word. So sometimes I'll open up a page that I've never created and I'll already see a lot of instances in other notes where I've cited it. And that's a cue for me to think, oh, what is this topic that I've written about, but I haven't formally defined it in my system? Like it's just a really great tool for discoverability and creating a knowledge management system that isn't linear. You can organize in folders, but really you can just tag things and have links. So it's more like a neural network than anything I've tried before.
That sounds awesome. I have to check that out.
Yeah, and I think that especially when you're a contractor and you're required to pick up new tools all the time, I don't know if you're like me, but if I haven't used a tool in a while, I've forgotten it. Even if it was one that I used daily for years, if I haven't used it in a while, there's a period where I'm like, how do I do this thing again? I know it can be done. I just can't quite remember how to do it. Well, I just have cheat sheets for tools. Like this is how to do it in JMeter. This is how to do that in Gatling, and it just makes it so much easier. I don't have to Google it. It's like Googling my brain before I actually use Google.
So one of the things that you mentioned that you're interested in is diversity in technology. And I am absolutely aware that I am a white male and I have interviewed 3 other white males so far on this podcast. And when I look at conferences and events, I see predominantly white males speaking as well, which is massively disproportionate to the diversity of people actually working as performance engineers from my own experience. So what are your views on diversity in technology?
This is one of the reasons that I wanted to take more of a public facing role, because I would look at the same things that you did and I wouldn't see anyone like me. And I don't necessarily think that I have to see someone like me in every job and every performance. But when you see nobody, and it sounds like you've had other women that you've worked with as performance engineers, but I I can name maybe 2 women that I've worked with in performance, and one is Asian, one is white, and I think that's a problem. So I think that if you can't see someone who resembles you in a job or a position that you want to have, whether that's physically, culturally, or experientially, I think you just have to step up and be that person, even if you don't necessarily think you are the best person to do it. And I very much feel that way because I'm very conscious of the fact that I there's a certain expectation of expertise that comes when you're watching somebody present. And I don't think of myself as an expert. I think there are other people that are way, way better equipped to give these presentations, but they're not me and they don't look like I do and they don't have the experiences that I do. So there is an element of me just pushing myself out there because I'm hoping that if I do, other people like me will think, oh, maybe it's a normal thing to have an Asian woman out there.
It's difficult for anyone, I think, to get up and put yourself out there, especially in a professional context where I think the stakes are higher to get up and stand up and say, hey, this is me, and I'm talking about the work that I do. But I would love to see, I would love to hear from a grad or someone who's just starting their career and to hear about their experience on their first day on the job, for example. That's really interesting to me. I guess that's really what this podcast was all about. It's that the human side of performance engineering. And I think that might inspire more people to get involved.
I think that there's something about performance testing because there are a lot of weirdos, and I mean that in the best way possible, in performance, don't you think? There are people from different backgrounds, very comparatively fewer than one might think, have come from a real computing background, which is great because we're bringing all of these interesting and diverse backgrounds to to the same thing, and we attack a problem in different ways. One thing that I've been called out on myself, like from other colleagues, is sometimes I say things like, "Oh, I'm not that technical," or variations on that theme that are just different ways to sell myself short. And I think that's something that not just people of color do, and everybody has a tendency to sell themselves short. And when you say things like, "I'm not technical," I think it also sends the wrong signal to others that you do have to be technical, whatever that means, to do the job, when that's not necessarily true. So I think that does impact diversity in a negative way.
Yeah. I want to do a talk, another episode coming up on imposter syndrome. It's just, what you were just saying now sounds so like a little bit like that potentially, where for whatever reason, a lot of people as performance engineers from any background, maybe the more they know, the more they can see the complexity of things, and they start to question themselves. Well, maybe I don't actually know what I'm talking about.
I absolutely agree. I get that all the time. And the best way that I've found to deal with imposter syndrome is that every time I start to think, why would anyone listen to me? Or what if they find out that I don't actually know what I'm talking about? I just go with it and embrace the noobiness of it. And I call myself a noob, and I try new things all the time. Like, I think it's going to be later this month, I'm going to be talking at a conference about chaos engineering. About 2 months ago, I knew nothing. That was when I accepted the request or the offer to speak at a conference about chaos engineering.
Wow.
So when I say I put myself out there, I put myself out there. And if you look back at the content I've created in the last few weeks, you'll notice that I've been having people on to talk about chaos engineering. And I'm very open about the fact that I'm totally new. I don't know what all of this stuff is, and I'm starting from scratch. And I find that when you're honest about something, like I'm not going to be presenting and saying, "I am an expert in chaos engineering." No, I'm saying I'm a noob. This is how I managed to get past that beginner phase and do something productive anyway. And I'm not saying that everybody in the world should do it the way that I did, but if you're a beginner like me, hey, maybe this is a good way for you to start too. And I think that just defeats that little voice in your head that says you're not good enough. If you just acknowledge that, hey, maybe I'm not, but you know what? That's okay.
I think some people are afraid that if they are honest about how much they do or don't know, that's going to make them look like they don't know what they're doing. Or maybe they ask too many questions. Oh, they don't know what they're doing. My experience is quite the opposite. The people who stay quiet and don't say anything generally get lost later on, but it's the one who stands up and says, "Well, this doesn't make any sense to me," and everyone goes, "Thank goodness that person asked that question." Or it kind of gives other people permission to be honest about where they're at, and everyone learns more because of it.
That's also, I think you can tie that back to diversity too. I think one way of encouraging people from different backgrounds to be in tech is that when the few people that are in tech are on your team and you notice that they're being quiet, instead of prodding them to say something and to, in their minds, expose their ignorance, why don't you expose your ignorance? Show a little bit of vulnerability and ask the questions that they might be thinking.
Anything else you wanted to talk about that I haven't covered about diversity?
I think that you can look at diversity in different ways. It's not just gender diversity or sexual orientation or anything physical. It's also things like maybe I'm from a culture where it's not okay to just directly address a superior the way that it is okay in Western cultures. Maybe there are some cultural things like that people don't take into consideration, that it's not okay, like for a Filipino. So I am Filipino, I'm from the Philippines, but I've lived most of my life away from it, so it's kind of a mix of experiences there. But in Philippine culture, we never address our managers by the first name. So already from that, there's a distance. And so you have to know that when you're dealing with a Filipino, that is their natural inclination. They're not being unfriendly or whatever. They're showing you respect. So I think there's diversity is such a broad topic, but it just boils down to coming from a good place. It's not about blaming people the second they say the wrong pronoun or whatever. It is about coming from a place of really wanting to meet people where they are. And if you mess up, you apologize, and everyone should move on if it's heartfelt.
Okay, I only have two more questions. The first one is, and I've already seen these before, what do you think we need to do more of as performance engineers?
I think one, take notes, which we've talked about, but two, think about how we're communicating things. Because it's not actually the technical parts of performance that's hard. It's championing performance and trying to express to management why performance should be done, or trying to communicate test results to developers or other stakeholders, and being able to pinpoint exactly where they need to look. I think so much of our job is about how clearly and concisely we get a point across, and we need to spend more effort into improving those skills.
Have you got any specific tips or things that people can do to improve their communication, whether it be written or verbal or any other kind?
Yeah, so two books. One is Modern Technical Writing. I just looked it up. It's by Andrew Etter. It's a short book. It's very practical and talks about even things like markdown. You know, and so not just it's not just about the soft skills, but it's also concrete tools that you can use to publish a blog post or express something. So that's really good. Another book is The Art of Statistics, because I think that a lot of performance testers still don't understand statistical concepts that they really should be able to express to other people. And The Art of Statistics is a really great, non-highfalutin book that just teaches you everything you need to know and no more. But it talks about things like, how do you know when your sample size is big enough? So a performance test that's 2 minutes is really not a load test. It's like a shakeout. You know, so how do you tell when you have the right sample size, the right duration for your test? So those kinds of concepts, I really like those. And they also, in The Art of Statistics, they also talk about how to communicate results, which graphs are the best for which situations, which I thought was really useful.
That does sound incredibly useful. I haven't read either of those books. I have to check them out. Okay, last question. What do you think the biggest challenge facing performance engineering is right now?
I think our role is changing. I think there is a push for test ops. So there was already DevOps, which is the intersection of development and kind of an SRE role. And now there's a thing called test ops, where we're now expected not just to do the testing part of it, but we might also want to be able to set up a CI/CD pipeline and know a little bit about the deployment. And I think that comes with a lot of the need for us to learn new concepts and skills. This containerization movement is taking off, so that now what started off as, you know, virtual machines or virtual servers has morphed into things like Kubernetes and the blockchain and serverless computing. Those are all different implementations of distributed computing. So I think that we're looking, to some degree, they're already here. Those technologies are already here, but they're still evolving. And the question remains: how are we going to performance test applications that are on a level of distributedness, if that's a word, that we've never seen before? I think that's both frightening, a little frightening, because we have to learn so much and a lot is unknown, but also incredibly exciting because it's a whole new world.
As you were speaking, I could feel my buttocks clench with anxiety about, this is getting so complicated. How do we deal with all this stuff that's going on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Test ops I've never heard of before. Can you give me explain like five to me of what that is about?
Sure, it's just a conglomeration of or a blurring of the lines between the role of a tester and an operations engineer or maybe a DevOps person, and it just means that I think that the rise of startups and smaller companies has been messing with the roles, the traditional roles that we have in a software development lifecycle. And I think that I feel the tide moving in the direction of testers also being able to maybe deploy their own environments. And that sounds super scary, but as someone who has just gotten up to speed with Kubernetes and who started her own cluster for the very first time like a month ago, it's actually not that bad. And the thought of being able to do this on my own without having to schedule something with other people or whatever, just being able to take this definition of an environment as code, and running that and having my personal testing environment, that's empowering. So yeah, it's frightening, but there's so much more that we're going to be able to do.
So is it about applying operations engineering to test the world of testing, or is it also about applying testing methodologies or approaches to production systems as well?
I think it goes both ways, and chaos engineering might be a good place to link the two so that now you can have tests that are built into your code for deployment. Because everything is going into code, both development is already in code, and then the operations side, there's a movement called infrastructure as code. If your tests are also in code, then that just broadens our reach, because now we can test all of those with the same tests, with the same tool, and we can also be checking in code and deploying code ourselves if it's all in the same unified tool. I think we're still heading towards that future. I don't think it's that easy right now, but I think it's definitely a movement to keep an eye on.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for your time. It's been really great to chat to you. I can't believe we even talked more often. We should do this more often.
Yeah, we definitely should. Thank you for having me.
If the people out there in the world want to follow you or find out more about you and what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure, probably Twitter is the best. I am at N_VANDERHOEVEN. Sorry, that's my last name. Or you can email me at nicole@k6.io.
Thanks again, Nicole, for sharing your stories with us. And thank you to all of you for tuning in once again. And as always, this is performance time.